Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. Today we have another special guest who got 8 from IELTS. Hi Raziya.
Hi.
Could you introduce yourself?
My name is Raziya. I'm 19 years old and I study at World Languages University here in Tashkent.
I'm glad to know you. Let's start our interview. How did you become interested in English and when did you start learning it?
So I started when I was pretty young, so 13 years old. Maybe that's not too young, but so ever since then I've been really interested and been learning it on my own.
And where did you hear about Everest Learning Center?
So just before I got into university, which was last year, I studied Uzbek grammar there and also a little bit of maths. And this year, since my IELTS was going to expire anyways, I wanted to go to somewhere that I already knew a little bit about and I trusted, so I chose Everest.
Who is your teacher and what do you think about the role of your teacher in Everest in your result?
Huge, I would say, because I already had an experience learning there previously, last year before I got into university. Like I already mentioned, I went to a few teachers there, so I craved that environment again. And also my teacher is Isroil Buriyevning. And I chose him as a teacher because I had heard good things about him and also how he would conduct his classes in a very fun way. So I wanted to join that.
Actually, Isroil Buriyevning is one of the best teachers of our learning center. Okay, can we move to the subtest sections? Okay, let's talk about listening, reading, writing and speaking turn by turn.
Okay, so in listening and reading this time, I got an 8.5.
How did you improve your listening and reading score?
So if we start with reading, I think I would have to recommend Pauline Collins' book. Called Key to IELTS Success, and it was recommended by my teacher Israel. And remember, I think it was like my second week there, and he recommended this book, and he was like, "You guys have to check it out." And I think one of the reasons that made me pick that book up the exact same day was because he mentioned that it was a woman, and women supporting women, and I just wanted to pick that book up. And I remember reading it, and the book is very unique in a way where she describes what the examiner is exactly looking for in each of the sections, and also what and through that you get to know what gaps in your knowledge that you have to fill in order to achieve the score that you want to achieve. So with that. The impact that it had on the reading was that she really talked about in detail on how to approach reading in general and what the examiner is actually looking for and why they're making why the test is in a way it is. And before I used to approach it in a very funny way, which might come as a little shock, but I used to just read the passages first, and then just from what I already read and what I memorized, then I would answer the questions. And I remember it was like before even reading that book, we were in a class and we were doing reading practices. And I remember sitting with a friend there, and I was solving, and she asked me a question about the true, false, not given type of questions, and she was like, "Oh, what'd you get here?" And I remember that I got something completely different from her, and I remember at that time she was like, "No, your answer is wrong because," and then she flipped the page and she showed the exact same sentence in the paragraph, but it was just paraphrased. So it was really funny, the fact that I actually did not know the things were paraphrased, and that was a whole mind-blowing moment for me. And that's when I realized that things were just again, they were just paraphrased and the structures were changed up a little bit, and they were just synonyms, and that was it. I didn't know that before, so that was one of the biggest things that changed my score in reading and also in listening, because they're also paraphrased there. And then I remember it was also like in the book, in Pauline's book, she talks about skim reading and actually going, first just checking out the questions and not starting with reading the whole thing and just skim reading it. And that's what I do myself. if the way I approach reading is basically I go through all type of questions and the first questions for every single question type, so I can know whether they might not come in order. And when you're solving this example, say if true, false, not given questions, you could be in the same paragraph. You could be finding answers for gap filling questions, right? So that's what I do for reading. And that's one of the biggest things that actually improved my score. The fact that I actually understood how to approach it. And even during the test, again, and also one of the things is that you have to be really careful with the timing for reading. So the first two passages are easier, and that's what Isroil told us. He was like, the first ones are very easy, and not very easy, but you are supposed to only spend 15 minutes on the first sections. Yeah. And then for the last one, since it's a lot harder, then you get 30 minutes to work on that. And that's what I did on the test. And I remember going through both of the reading passages in 15 minutes again. And then I had like 27 minutes for passage 3. And one thing that I do with every single passage is that I double check every single question before moving on to the second one. And I did the same thing in the test. But then it was passage 3 that really broke me down. And even like in practice tests before, and when I would solve those Cambridge practice tests, I would never read the whole passage ever. But this time in the real exam, passage 3 was extremely difficult. The question types were extremely similar to each other as well. I remember like reading through it almost like over than 20 times, the whole passage. And before I left the exam, I already had the whole thing memorized. But again, I kind of like, there were like 3 or 2 questions that I had to do, not by heart, but I had to guess my way through it, which I never actually did before. But yeah, I got an 8.5. And I didn't get my breakdown yet, so I don't know exactly how many mistakes I did. And then moving on to the listening part.
Okay, I have another question. How do you think about reading articles or reading books?
So, like I said before, I had a 7, right? And also, I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but I've been studying English since I was 13. So I've been, and one of the biggest things I think I could even identify myself as is a book reader. I love reading books, and I think that had a very big impact. So I've always been reading books and articles and things like that. So the only thing so it's obviously it's really important, but for me, the one thing that actually made me improve was the fact that I realized it was paraphrased, and then also worked on my timing. And for me, that was what it was, because I already had I was already constantly reading and things like that.
The most important thing in reading is understanding. Just understanding the paraphrase. Okay. Let's move to listening.
So listening, again, the same thing goes for that as well. Once I understood that things were paraphrased, obviously it was so much more easier. And I'm not going to give the same advice that everybody gives. It's not that it's not important, but obviously it is. But you know how everybody tells you to listening to scientific podcasts help you a lot, and obviously it does. But I've been doing it for a very long time, but still I couldn't improve it. And I think again, like, realizing the fact that things were paraphrased made me go through it much more easier and get the score that I got. And also, one of the things that I would probably say for it is that you got to learn to shadow a little bit when you're doing it. And shadowing, it might sound funny, but for those who don't know, it's basically repeating after what the natives are saying. And I think for me, I never realized it, but I didn't even know what the word shadowing meant, what the term shadowing meant, like a month ago. And there was another friend that was like, I gotta improve my accent, and I do it through shadowing. And that's when I understood that it actually had a term. But ever since I was young, my parents have always been teaching me languages, and all my other siblings as well. So I've always been growing up in an environment where we were learning constantly new languages. And I think I picked that thing up on my own without even realizing that I was doing it. But ever since I was young, I've been repeating after what the language. So I've been repeating after what or how the natives would speak in the language that I was trying to learn without even realizing that the fact that I was doing it. But yeah, so in listening, what I would say is in order to not lose focus, you have to do a little bit of shadowing, especially in the beginning. And that would be, for example, like in the beginning, in part 2 and part 3, and not in part 1 and part 2, you already are laser focusing on everything, right? But then you kind of, which I experienced myself, you would slowly start to lose focus in part 2 and part 3. No, part 3 and part 4. And for me, what helped me to stay focused, even during the exam, was that I would repeat after what the speakers were saying in the beginning. So basically, like they first start by introducing the topic, right? Or if it's like a conversation that they're having, they start by introducing what they're doing and things like that. They don't just go over to the answers. And in that part, in order to stop myself and stop my brain from wandering around in Wonderland, I would repeat what they would say, but obviously not out loud because you don't want to disturb other people around you. But as long as your mouth is moving, it helps you to focus and feel like you're a part of that conversation. And through that, you feel like you're a part of the conversation, responsible to be you are in a state where you're supposed to be listening to what the speakers are saying, because they might just ask something about you.
Shadowing, it means that shadowing is not only helpful for your speaking, it's also helpful for your listening, especially for part 1 and part 2.
No, part 2 and part 3 as well. Because you already get time to check out the questions and skim through the answers, so you already have time for that before they start speaking. So once they actually start speaking, you got to be listening to what they're saying and repeating after them, just like you're actually having a conversation with them, and you might just join in at any minute, so you have to be listening to them, paying attention to it. And once you put yourself in a situation like that, you're naturally not going to lose focus. And again, this is you have to take it with nuance. You can't just do that throughout the whole sections. You can't do that. Only in the beginning. So once they are introducing the topic, at the beginning, and once you start realizing that they are moving on to, they're almost approaching the answers, and they're going to give you answers for, the gap fillings or multiple choice questions, then that's when you stop doing it and you pay attention to trying to find the answer. And yeah, I think that would be one of the biggest things that I would say that you have to take away. And another thing would be, this is not really unrelated to it, but it's just a very general advice. But for me, in my case, when I was on this test, when I was just going through the different parts of the different type of questions you would get in the beginning when they're just introducing the instructions, and that's when you get a chance. And I was taking in CD, and I was going through all different type of questions. And then in part 3, it was in part 3, I realized that I got a map. And immediately at that moment, I told myself that I was going to at least do one mistake, which was really unconsciously, I was just thinking of it back of my head. I didn't even realize that I did it. And again, like I was hyper focused on every single part of the test until I came to map, and that's when I was like, and then I lost focus in the first question in map, and that's when I was like, oh God. And I think so. One thing that I would say about that is that again. The narrative that I told myself was so powerful that it actually came true. And it's really important to understand that the narrative that we're telling ourselves are extremely powerful, that they will inevitably come true, right? Because the way our mind is wired is that it does anything in its hand to prove ourselves right. So if you're going to tell yourself that you're going to fail at a certain question, then your mind will do anything and everything to prove you right. It doesn't gain anything from proving you wrong, right? So that is, even though it might seem very insignificant, but these little details in important days, or even in life in general, are one of the biggest things that will change your outline of life. So I think really approach the test thinking good things only, and be really mindful of the things that you are feeding your mind with, especially on the test day.
I have another question. How do you think, is it useful to do dictation for part 4? to improve your
Dictations.
listening? Because I know a lot of teachers who usually give advice to do dictation for part 4. How do you think? Is it helpful?
So with Isroil, I don't remember him doing that ever. And me personally, like I've said, I've always been learning English through YouTube and just various podcasts and things like that. So I've always been listening to. I've been always listening to English speakers. So I think in that sense, maybe I already had that part where I was understanding what they were saying. So maybe for those people that are not really able to catch what the speaker is saying, maybe for them it's good to do dictation, because that way you're able to distinguish between, because again, when you're a beginner, you have a hard time understanding. So I would say that for those who are at the very beginning levels of learning English, then for them it would probably be useful, because they have been learning languages or words very separately and individually. So once the speaker actually speaks at a normal speed that they actually speak in real life, that's the time when they might have a hard time understanding the connected speech, right? So for them, in order to be able to familiarize themselves with that, maybe dictations would help them out.
Thanks for sharing tips and techniques for improving listening and reading. Let's talk about writing. What was your writing score at first attempt?
I got a 6 last time, and
then
now I got a 7. And my last attempt was 2 years ago, when I was 17. And if we just approach writing in general, before I got a 6 2 years ago, I thought my writing was going to be my strongest section, because since I already mentioned, I was learning general English and I've been writing for a very long time, and naturally I thought of myself as a very good writer, because ever since I was a kid, I've always loved writing. I remember they were like, I was 9 or something. I remember I pulled an all-nighter, and it's my first time ever doing it. And I was going to finish a book that I was writing. But so I've always thought of myself as a good writer. And I remember walking into my exam, and last time it was on paper. And I spent, if we talk a little bit about how it went, so in my task 1, I got a process essay, which I did not understand at that time, but I was really lucky to get it, because it doesn't really require specific vocabulary like line graphs does or tables does. So I was really lucky in that aspect. And then I got and then my task 2, I got present both. Discuss both opinions and then give your own opinion at the end. Discussion essay. And again, I was very lucky in that as well, because maybe if I got this advantage, I would have maybe struggled a little bit. But I remember finishing it 20 minutes earlier, and at that time I just sat down, I was resting my head, and I was like, oh, finally this is over. And I was really proud of myself. I couldn't really find any mistakes or anything noticeable at that time. And I remember they were like, put your pens down. My pen was already down. I didn't do anything. And then I realized when I looked up, everybody was counting things. And I was like, why are they counting? And I was flipping through the pages, wondering what I missed, because 2 times before that I had actually missed. On tests, I have the habit of missing the last page, and this time I thought the same thing, but I couldn't find anything. And I was like, I'm pretty sure we weren't doing math tests, right? And it looked like people were calculating. They were, calculating with their hands. And I remember reading through the instructions over and over again till I noticed that there was a word count. I didn't know that. And so I briefly just counted through, and I remember my task 1, it was less than 100 words. For task 2, again, it was 170 words or something. But I guess again, maybe in terms of task achievement, it was good. So I got a 6 anyways. And then this time, again, I didn't really have that much time to prepare for writing, and I was focusing on all my other sections, because in mocks I was getting, my writing section was the lowest. So I was I'll rather focus on other sections and the same thing. But this time in writing, I got a table in task 1. And it was comparing 3 different years. And on task 2, I got, I think yeah, it was like, is it a negative or positive development? And then
opinion essay.
Opinion essay
Yeah.
again, right? And I first started with the introduction. You know, you paraphrase, and there's a structure. And I remember really trying to stick to the instruction, to the structure, and I spent 10 minutes just writing the introduction, and then like kind of trying to plan out my body one. And I realized there was only 15 minutes left, and that's when I was like, you know what, I'm just going to throw the structure out of the window, and I'm just going to write with the flow and just go with the flow, because I did not really have time to try to figure out where an example was going to go and where an explanation was going to go. So I just went with that, and I was like, if I have time over, I'll go over and, you know, try to fix a few things up. And I then finished it in 45 minutes, and then I moved on to table. I had 15 minutes left, and again with that, because the introduction and the overview is the most important thing in task 1, I spent 11 minutes on that, and then I had like 3 minutes, no, 4, I think it was like 3 minutes left. And that's when I was like, oh, should I actually write the bodies, or should I go and, you know, to try to correct my mistakes? But then I was like, that would be the most stupidest thing I would do. So I decided to write everything. And yeah, I wrote both of the bodies in 3 minutes. And then I had a minute to just, you know, check my word count and just see if there's like punctuations or something like that that I could fix, but not grammar mistakes, because I knew if I would do that, that would be a mistake, because I only had a minute left. So in task 1, I think I got like over 170 words, and then on task 2 it was 280 words or something like that. So I was proud of myself, and it was the best I could do. And yeah, and then I went out of the test feeling good about myself, I think.
Did you expect 7 from your writing score?
I kind of did, but again, like. But I obviously was doubting, because I was getting very low in marks. So
what was your mock result?
I don't want to tell you.
It's 5.5?
Yeah, writing, yeah, kind of 5.5 or even 6, but I would never get a 7. But I think the fact that it was on CD was the one that made me really comfortable, because I remember during mocks, I would erase my bodies and, you know, examples, and rewrite it, and I think that really would take up a lot of my time. But whereas like on CD, it's very easy to move up a few things and, you know, to edit your essay. So I think that really helped me.
And the last one is speaking. You know, guys, I was just shocked when I saw your results, especially your speaking score, because it was 8. You know, we have a lot of candidates who got 8 or 8.5, but their speaking results were around 7 or 7.5. But when I saw your result, I was just shocked, surprised. How do you think? Is it difficult to get 8 from speaking? And what did you do to improve your speaking?
So last time I got a 6.5. I don't know if I mentioned it, but at that time, I had not gone through the questions, so I did not really have that much of a general idea what the things were going to be about. And also, again, the same thing with writing, I did not know the structure. And I've heard a lot of people talk about the fact that in IELTS, I don't know if it's like, I can't quote anyone on it because I'm not sure if it's true or not, but it's I've heard people saying that it's 50% your own knowledge, and then it's 50% the way you deliver it, so like your structure, right? So last time I obviously didn't know that, so I didn't approach writing and speaking with a structure in mind. And this time in speaking, I did have a structure, and I did practice a lot on the speaking app as well. And last time, I went in with the thought of thinking, as long as I did not stop speaking and as long as I answered the examiner, that was good enough. And I remember being really proud of myself after the speaking exam as well, and last time. And I, again, like, it was my first time taking anything like that, and it was my first time ever, like, speaking to a native, and for that long of a time as well. So I was really proud of myself for going through with it, and I expected a really high score because again, like my English was good at that time as well. It didn't really change that much, but only the way I approached it did change. So this time, I have a set approach that I usually answer questions with, and it's usually it goes by first talking about the past, and then the present and the future. An exam, especially in part 2, if the examiner is still not stopping you, you talk about the lessons learned, right? And having that little guidance really does help you out a lot, because then you have a lot of more things to say rather than just going with the flow. And I learned this trick by a YouTuber on YouTube. So you guys can also check her out, and I think the channel's name was Lily's IELTS or something.
Yeah, I know her.
You know her?
Yeah.
Good, because I discovered her channel just like a week before my exam, because obviously she's on social media, and I don't have any social media platforms in my apps. I don't have any apps.
Really?
Yeah, because it really does distract me, and I think I've like stopped using it. It's almost like been almost 2 years now since I stopped using. And so it was like I only watch YouTube videos on my computer, and it was that time when I found her channel, and it was a complete blessing because I feel like she was the one who saved me in both in writing and speaking. And her channel is mainly focused on the writing section, but then she has a few videos on all the other sections as well. And I think she had like only 2 videos on speaking. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, she talks about that technique, about talking about the past and things like that. So I think I remember going into the exam this time thinking, I was going to use her technique. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the speaking exam itself now. And so
did you take via Zoom or face-to-face?
It was Zoom.
It was Zoom.
Yeah, and it was recommended.
And the first time?
The first time face-to-face.
Face-to-face.
Yeah. I didn't even know Zoom worked like at that time. But this time I was kind of contemplating whether, because I booked it very early, so I knew I was going to get the option to choose. So I was contemplating whether to choose to do it through Zoom or face-to-face. And some people say that body language matters a lot, and it's easier to deliver your message if you're looking at them face-to-face. So that was the one thing that was bugging me. I was like, what should I do? I remember talking with Isroil, and he recommended to do it through Zoom. And he was like, most of my 9s that I got them through Zoom. So that's when I was like, okay, I'll 100% do it through Zoom. And I do not regret it. Because again, like, I think one of the biggest things that made me choose that was the fact that even in mocks, I would get really distracted when, the examiners would note things down, and even though I tried not to look, I would do that. And it really does distract you, right? You lose your flow, and you're like, oh, did I do a mistake? And you start paying more attention to your language instead of the ideas that you were, and you lose your ideas as well. So I think in that aspect, Zoom was extremely helpful, because the only thing you can see is the examiner's face, right? You can't see them writing anything down. And also, you can also be looking at yourself, because the screen is divided into half. So you could not even be looking at the examiner, and they still will not notice. So I think that was really good. And again, I took 2 mocks before, first with my teacher, and then second one was with an examiner,
what were the
mock
results?
examiner. With my teacher, it would be 8. And he said if you would get things that were the topics that you knew and were prepared for, you would even get higher than that. And in my mock, I got a 7.5. And the reason was, even with Isroil, it was because I had a hard time adapting myself or my brain or my inner voice to English, because I was just speaking with them, and I just had to switch really quickly. But with native speakers, you already know that they don't know your language, so you'll have to switch really quickly. And so I would always struggle in part 1, but this time part 1 went incredibly well, and I remember just feeling like I was on a night cloud or something until part 2 came. But basically in part 1, I got questions about my accommodation, so the places that I lived in my neighborhood, things like that, and I answered them I tried to answer them like personalized, but they were very long, and I think like except for the part when they asked about your name, and the way I just introduced my name, and I was like, this is my name, and this is what you can call me by, because at first was like, I'm not gonna tell that, and I'm gonna wait for them to ask what they should call me by, but then I was like, I'll save time, so that's what I did. And then I remember getting questions about, where do you live right now, and then talked a little bit about my past and where I lived before and where I live right now, and then I got questions about neighborhood, and I talked about my previous neighborhood and how it's different from this one, and then I also got questions about daily routines. And again, I talked about my past and how it was when I used to go to school.
At this moment, I have a question. Did you read any sample answers for all the questions?
So for part 1, no, it didn't. And also, like, the app where you get sample questions. I don't know, but it's almost like the app has beef with me or something like that. It really does not let me download it. I don't know why. It doesn't work on my phone. And I've tried it on my friend's phone, but it works on them. But I've tried it on my own phone, my parents' phone. It does not, for some reason. I don't know. It doesn't let me sign in. So I didn't have access to the questions, neither the samples. But I had friends sending me them. But so I had the actual version where you would only get the topics. So I only prepared for for part 2s. And with everything else, I was like, there are general questions. You can go through with them. So that's what I did. And then with part 1, I did not read any samples. I just tried to answer them naturally and, like that. And then, I covered a little bit about daily life and then a little bit about phone. And that's when I talked a little bit about social media and things like that. And then I got a little bit about the impact on internet on myself, and I talked a little bit about that as well. And again, like, I was really happy with my answers because the examiner was the one who was stopping me. I was full of ideas and just, I was really happy until we moved on to part 2. But in my head, I was like, okay, part 1, that was the part that I was the most scared of because again, I had a really, I kind of have a hard time just adapting a little bit. But now I was like, okay, if part 1 went that well, I'm going to rock other parts as well. But as soon as the screen popped up in the questions and the examiner was like, okay, now let's talk about historical buildings in your country. I was like, oh God, no, because that does not exist on the app, right? On part 2, but it existed in part 3. But again, I did not check part 3s. It was not something that I prepared for. And I remember just going, I'll just go through with this, do not stop speaking. I'll just try to come up with anything and everything, even if I'm repeating myself, because I was like, the only thing that kept me pushing was that, I was telling myself that the examiner could see that I was having a hard time delivering ideas and just coming up with ideas. And I was like, okay, so the examiner is probably going to change the topic in part 3. And that was the only thing that I kept on reassuring myself with. And part 2 ended. So I remember in part 3, there was only one question that I was extremely proud of. And that was the only question that I liked in part 3 as well, that I was able to elaborate. And I had ideas on it. And it was basically about the impact I think it was like the impact that businessmen have on public buildings that they are investing in, that they are building. And it was basically a question about like, how much do you think they have a say in that? And I remember answering it by, talking about how obviously they have a bigger say in it because they're the ones who are investing in it. They're the ones who are, picking the design, and that they are the ones that are, they are the ones who are picking design and the architecture and everything. So they will have a bigger say in the design and things like that and the way it looks. But then I was like, obviously, without considering the public trends, they will never be able to make money out of it though. So that's the number one thing they'll have to consider, because who else are going to be using those public buildings other than the public itself? So it's like, so that is one of the biggest things that they'll have to consider. Otherwise, they will not be able to monetize through it. And it was obviously longer than how I answered right now. But I remember that was the only question that I was like, okay, now I liked this question. I was able to elaborate it. And then still I got a few questions about historical buildings after that as well. And I tried to answer it as much as I could. And I guess I think I got like 2 more questions after that question. And the examiner ended it. And I remember walking out of that exam room and calling my mom, and I was crying because again, it was not a topic that I was prepared for, and I was like, oh, if I got asked about anything else, I would be able to, show myself, and I was really unhappy with. But I guess like my general, even though like I lack topic specific vocabulary and things like that, I guess my general English showed through it, and that was what the examiner could, give my score by. But maybe or it was just that part one was good, and maybe that was what it was. But in general, before, like I've said, my part one was the weakest section, and then part two and part three were, I would never stop speaking in them, and they were my stronger section in mocks. But this time it was completely, the roles were completely switched. But yeah, I still got an 8, alhamdulillah. And I guess like it's just something that once you, I don't know, maybe once you do like exams like that, the only things that you really notice are your weakest points and your shortcomings, and you don't notice on the places that you did good with. So I think that's what happened. I remember crying and thinking I was going to get the lowest score. And the thing with CD is that you have to take all the sections in one day, right? So I remember wishing that I did not book it on CD, because I really had a hard time, pulling myself back up and after speaking. And I was like, because I was depending on my speaking score way too much. And then I was like, okay, now how am I going to do in writing in the other sections, because my spirit was already down. But then I think my exam was at 10 o'clock, so my other sections, my main test was at 2, so I had a lot of time to prepare myself for it and to get back together. And yeah.
Okay, did you expect 8 from IELTS speaking?
Like I already said,
because of the topic that you were afraid of.
Exactly, that's what I thought. Oh, we're gonna get a very low score in speaking, but then I was hoping my other sections were gonna pull it up, and yeah, I got it again on CD. You don't even have to wait for that long. I got it in 2 days, and my results, the actual paper certificate, was out in 3 days. But yeah, I didn't even have to wait for that long, and. But last time, I remember when I got a 7, I did not, take it with a lot of pressure. I did not take it with thinking, I have to get a certain score. I was just like, as long as, it's around 6, it was going to be fine. Because I was going to, next year I was going to apply for university. And I was like, as long as it's enough for university, it was going to be enough. So I didn't have pressure on that. So I didn't even wait for the results. But yeah, I got, and on paper you get 2 answers in 3 days, and no, 13 days, right? And I remember just completely forgetting about it. And it was on a day where we were going to go on a trip to, for a vacation. And I remember getting it just when we were packing. We were about to leave, and I got a message on my phone that I got my results. And I remember at that time, I didn't even understand what 7 meant. Because again, I was very new. My family members didn't even understand either. But my mom was extremely proud of myself, and she was jumping, she was hugging me. I remember thinking, is this what it took you? Is this all it took you for to hug me? And if I knew that, I would have, taken it I would taken it earlier. Yeah, my mom was happy at that time. I didn't understand what it meant, but yeah, this time we were all happy, we all celebrated.
Despite of not understanding what IELTS was, your family reaction was very good, especially your mom's. Yeah. Personally, it's so interesting. What was the purpose of taking IELTS again? You have already taken IELTS and you got 7. You have already enrolled to the university.
Again, with the purpose of... maybe this time I was thinking, maybe if I understand what IELTS is, maybe I'll get a higher score. So obviously I wanted to see what score I was going to land. And also it's almost expiring, and I also wanted to teach at Everest. So that's what I'm looking forward to too. And that's why I took a test again.
How did you feel when you got 8, when you saw your result?
Obviously, I was really happy, but I think one of the sections that made me extremely happy was the speaking and writing. Yeah, but mainly speaking, like you said, because again, I wasn't expecting it. So, yeah.
I would be happy to see you as a teacher in our team, and thanks for sharing such advice.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for not refusing our request. If you found this interview useful, like it and write your comments below. Goodbye.